Today on our Tech for Business podcast, Kelsey and I are joined by Nate, our Director of Cybersecurity and vCISO, and Mariah, our Identity and Access Management Analyst. So our listeners may remember Mariah from our Identity Access Management kind of beginners. Today, we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive. Before we do that, though, Mariah, I was hoping you'd give us a quick, what is Identity Access Management? What do our listeners need to know to understand our conversation today?
Yeah, definitely. So just think of identity and access management. It includes processes, technologies, and policies used to manage and protect digital identities and regulate resource access. So I would say the primary goal, we want to ensure digital security of users, devices, resources, and to only allow authorized entities to access within your networks, your organization's network, and also improve processes. So we want management, control, and maintaining data security.
Yeah, I think Mariah in the past has summarized it the best way I've ever heard was the intersection between IT, security, and HR. Right, it's right where all those processes and technology meet to then grant access to the rest of the network. But it's so ingrained within there. So again, Mariah just randomly dropped that on me in a casual conversation once. I was like, that makes complete sense to me.
Yes.
So, and I love identity. If you've been on any other podcasts, it's one of my favorite parts of cybersecurity. So.
Yeah, Nate, we just did a zero trust series, and I think it was the secret just identity, but that's what we were talking about the most on those podcasts. So maybe you could why is this important for businesses to start considering and implementing?
Yeah, so if you've taken a look at the Zero Trust podcast as well, we've talked about how to increase the security maturity of your organization, all the way from, essentially like a baselining, kind of just starting with some of the processes that you have, not really technology. Then we started talking about implementing technology. Then we started talking about maybe implementing some automation, and then continuous validation of access, where if something changes, it automatically revokes access. And so that's just one of the pillars of Zero Trust. And so as we're talking about identity, we're not going to go like completely down in the weeds like I would love to today. But once we start talking about some of this stuff, we'll lay the foundation. We'll go into some of them a little bit. But when we're talking about the maturity of your identity program, it can get really, really exciting. And that's some of the stuff that CIT has done internally. And so, yeah, that's why it's a really big passion as well.
Great. So again, on our first podcast, we did a high level, what is it? Why do businesses need it? Maybe some practical implementation. So if you are an IT or cybersecurity director in your company, what are kind of those first steps? What are things you need to consider? And then, what do you two want to kind of dive into today with identity access management?
Yeah, I can maybe talk about it a little bit from the business side and, why you want to consider focusing on this a little bit. And then, maybe we can hand it off to Mariah to talk a little bit more about some of the options that we see. But for identity, and I think we talked about this in the past as well, is identity is, sorry, let me pause and actually go back a little bit further from even older topics and, podcasts is in the past, IT and, businesses had the castle wall mentality. It was the office walls are the perimeter and they safeguarded the data, the technology via, just trusting the walls. So often things, access was the door, you had the key, then we moved to fobs typically, and then we put in firewalls. Well, now if people and, offices typically worked in the office, so there was no remote work. Once BYOD, bring your own device, and all the laptops started coming about. Then we started seeing a remote workforce. We saw the introduction of VPNs. So the castle wall mentality kind of started breaking a bit, right? Just how do you trust someone outside of the castle that's coming in trying to work? Right. And so going from there, but in the modern era of IT, which modern being anytime here in the latest 10 years, is everyone's working remote these days, right? Or everyone is interconnected with the internet, or there's applications that we all use today that are cloud based. So no longer can we just trust the castle wall and the perimeter of our offices. Everything is so interconnected today. So what is the new perimeter? That's where identity comes in, because who is granting access into these applications? It's our user accounts. It's the email addresses, the usernames, the passwords. And then that's where we start seeing things like the multi-factor coming about, right? Is because now we can't even trust the user accounts because we have things like phishing. And so this is where the identity concept comes in, is how do you consolidate and streamline and make it easier for users to protect that identity as the world becomes interconnected further and further and further. So the business need is you have to protect your accounts. You have to know which accounts you have, and how do you do it efficiently?
So, Mariah, I know we've done the beginner. This is kind of our intermediate, and we're going to eventually have an advanced identity access management podcast or webinar. I was hoping you'd give us a little bit of a teaser. We talked before the podcast started about these pillars, and I know you'll deep dive into that in the future. But would you give us a little overview of what those are and what that means, and how that kind of builds up what identity access management is?
Sure. So, when we mentioned the pillars, for our use, we're looking at directory services, and then user management services, authentication services, and authorization services. So each of those pillars, we can break those down. So if we're looking at directory services, that'll be like what identity stores being used. That can be things like Okta, are you using Azure AD, just Active Directory, even Google Cloud. Um, and then as far as user management services, how are you doing your provisioning, deprovisioning? Do you have self-service enabled for your users? And then authentication services, that's kind of your single sign-on, MFA, session and token management. And then for authorization services, you're looking at your roles, rules, your attributes, and then privilege access.
And Mariah, would you say that it's a common misconception that multi-factor is what people just assume identity is, right? Someone just says, "Hey, I need to implement some identity service. Can I implement?"
I would say so. It's probably MFA is the most common thing you would think of.
Yeah,
I guess it's so popular now, like you just said earlier.
yeah, and I call it out because, as Mariah just talked about, that's only one of the 4 pillars of a full identity program. And so when you're taking a look at multi-factor, yes, you can do the push notifications, you can do the phone calls, you can do the text messages. Phone call and text messages are completely weak. Please don't use them. Go to more of a phish-resistant method. But taking a look at some of the other pillars, directory services, this is where you can get really, really powerful. Is Mariah had mentioned, are you syncing users from Active Directory, that type of stuff. Well, what if we start talking about other business applications outside of IT? So most organizations, they have some type of HR user directory, right? This could be the Workdays, the Bamboos, the ADPs, whatever it is. So at the business level, you're running into issues where HR is managing a user directory, IT is managing a user directory, and unless you're doing data reconciliation all the time, this is going to get out of sync very fast, and it's going to cause reporting issues. It's going to cause access issues, which means a security issue, right? So how can you ensure that when a employee's onboarded to the time that they're terminated, or terminated, access is controlled, moving away from just multi-factor mentality all the way up to the identity mentality, is you can pull in sources from other locations and start consolidating all that data. And maybe there's different attributes that are different between solutions. You can tie those back together. So maybe in HR software, someone's listed as a part-time employee or a full-time employee or retired, or whatever it is. You can take that and remap what that means for your IT systems. So there's a lot of automation that starts getting implemented in here, which again, talking about the higher levels of that zero trust mentality. So I just want to call it out. Please, as we continue going deep into here, identity does not mean multi-factor. That is just one component of it. If there's the single thing I want you to take away of, is that, because if you're limiting it to multi-factor, you're limiting it to the rest of the capabilities possible.
Yeah, and then so we talked about directory services. That's one pillar, right? The identity store. And then Nate just mentioned provisioning and deprovisioning and maintaining a good relationship with HR. So that's our user management services. And then if we look at the third pillar, authentication services, you can even add single sign-on on top of that. With MFA, it just adds extra protection. And then as how that fits with user management services, if you have single sign-on, that can provide like a centralized place where if you do need to provision or deprovision, all your users are in one place with all the applications that have single sign-on enabled, and then you can just kind of like, oh, you're getting deactivated, then all the applications you're authorized to have, you'll lose access to those as well. So it kind of makes it easier when it comes to the user management services, and also adding that extra layer of protection with single sign-on.
And I know, as Mariah said that, there's someone else that's also thinking, why on earth would I want to do single sign-on? You told me that identity is the perimeter. If someone compromises that account, can't they go clicking into every other application and quickly gain access, right? It's the number one complaint about single sign-on. And there's validity to that, right? It depends on how you configure it. And this goes back to the zero trust mentality of the further you mature your organization up that pillar, and up to the optimal status, if something does change, you can block access. You can do additional validation if something is happening. But the concern about you get into one account, you get into all of them, legitimate. The benefit of that could be, well, now that we have, and to Mariah's point, is if an employee is terminated, maybe it's a disgruntled employee, maybe it's someone that, heck, let's just say user account compromise, right? It's someone that just clicked on the phishing link and you're just waiting for them to go try and log into the system. You rotate the password, you disable it, you suspend it, whatever it is. Now, rather than Mariah having to go log into 70 different applications and rotate her password because she was a bad security employee and reused the same password against all 70 of them, she rotates it once, it's changed for all of them, and you've now protected 70 applications at the same time. Additionally, because you have everything consolidated into a single portal, you have one unified audit log saying every action that Mariah takes in there, whether it's logging in, accepting the multi-factor, clicking on a link, being able to log in, you see all the location, IP addresses, device contacts, everything. And you build a whole chain of the story of what was accessed. So if there ever was a security incident, you can go, I just know that there was, 2 applications that were accessed out of 70 of them, and here's the full chain of events, and I can backtrace that. So there's 2 sides of the coin.
That's really cool. As we're talking, it kind of reminds me, we mentioned again in that zero trust about IT used to sort of exist in this silo, and really kind of breaking down those walls and working with HR or sharing those programs and making sure that as a user moves through their day, how interconnected it is. I just thought that was interesting,
Mariah used to create accounts all the time, former job and working with HR. So, Mariah, if you want to talk about HR processes and how they need to work well with IT, maybe some of the considerations.
It's really important to maintain positive relationships. Well, in general, right, with everyone you work with, but especially if you do have to work side by side with HR or the application owners for what the employees use. Just let's just all be friends and help each other out.
There's some HR person that's been told that no one trusts them listening to this going, yes, please. Be my friend.
Yes.
But yeah, as we're talking about like those directory services and linking an HR system to an IT system, Mariah, when we did that integration, I don't know how many meetings we had with HR, just trying to map out, going, oh yeah, we should do this. And then we go onboard a new employee and, oh, that process broke because some process broke along the way, or some automation broke along the way, or odd case scenarios where someone retired, right? You probably want them to finish the last day. Well, when your tool is maybe configured to say terminate access as soon as the HR system terminates, they can't finish their last day. And so it's a great parting gift with a retired person saying, get out the door, please.
That stuff. Is it a real heavy lift when you are trying to implement some of these things? You make it sound like it's potentially a lot on the front end.
It's a journey. We'll put it that way. Is it heavy? It depends on how far you want to take it, right? But again, that goes back to the zero trust mentality of where do you want to live on that level, because you do get a lot of efficiency gains when you're up at those optimal levels, but oftentimes you're very, very focused on, the tooling, the skills, the budget, and whatever the ROI that comes off of that. You're hyper focused on all of that. If you're just looking for multi-factor, you don't have to go that far. So to get to a full identity program, it is a journey and it'll take a lot of work. Right? Is single sign-on just to help implement one tool. Maybe it takes 5 minutes to configure an application with single sign-on. Other times you have to go work with vendors. It might take 2 days to finally get something configured. Now, if it's an application that's heavy into business process, or maybe a critical application, so think of things like Office 365. Well, now you have to go affect however many employees you have. A new change, you have to do all the communication. You need to, if you're bringing automation in, again, you have to map out what your business processes look like to what the desired action is. Maybe there's some licensing that you have to redo on the back end. You implement it, something breaks, you roll it back, you fix it, you re-implement it. And then, again, for the HR processes, if you're going from an HR mastered system, it's a lot of meetings with HR to truly map out, like, you onboard something, what is every single step that you do, and how can we tie or automate that process as much as possible. So CAT, we've been implementing identity for 7 years, and I feel like we're still not done. This isn't a quick fix for you.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Are there any because when you're talking about identity access management and kind of implementing that, it's a lot on like the programs that you're using and the applications that you're using. Is there any differences across industries? Obviously, the programs and the applications you're using are going to be different, but is like finance and their compliance needs versus manufacturing or healthcare? What's sort of the difference as we're looking deeper into each of these industries? Or is it kind of the same?
Ryan, you want to take a stab? So she's giving me the eyes. It at the end of the day, it's relatively the same,
Yeah.
with some nuances. Is we still talked about organizations moving to the cloud.
Mhm.
They still have to protect those accounts. Identity is still the perimeter. So at some point, you should be addressing this. The main differences are probably going to be the on-prem versus the cloud, because we know that some industries are heavily regulated and need to be on-prem, or if they are trying to go cloud-based solutions, they have to have extra validation that those are secure and designed securely because of the content that's potentially going to be flowing through them. So think of things like FedRAMP if you're a federal agency, that type of stuff. Um, and then also we can go deep into this on like the extra deep dive
Yeah.
series. There's other applications that simply don't support single sign-on or some of those, and so it's how do you protect a on-premise application that doesn't support it in the first place? Are there things that you can maybe put ahead of it, like an authentication proxy before granting access to that on-prem solution? So those are the considerations I probably want to focus on. And then some of the other stuff would be reporting, right? If you're in a non-regulated space, maybe you don't care. If you are in a regulated space, you're going to have to keep some of the audit logs. And especially if you're in healthcare, for example, HIPAA, 6 years, um, all that access to that PHI, you're going to have to keep some type of audit log. Now you might be talking about streaming all the logs over to, it's a SIM solution, a security information and event management solution. And yeah, but the overall concept of it is relatively the same.
So as we kind of get towards the end, I'm always curious as to like 5 years from now, what do you think will change in these identity access management solutions? Do you think there'll be big changes coming? Do you think it will kind of stay the same? Is there going to be a lot of changes in implementation? What do you think the conversation 5 years down the road will be?
What do you think, Mariah? I know Okta's been pushing out a lot of new features.
I feel like there might be like to adapt to the new AI applications that are coming out, even though AI has kind of been around for a while now. It's just more publicized these days. But I mean Okta does have or will have like an AI chat soon for the admins. So that is coming, but that's very soon. So
Yeah, I do agree that AI is going to be continue to be integrated in there. So one of the things that I could see over the next couple of years is threat hunting with identity. So typically, threat hunting is focused more on the endpoints and the network logs today. The identity logs is really not a whole lot that's typically focused on threat hunting within there. There are solutions that have been doing this, but typically they're more manual. I do see the day where someone like, well, I'm not even pick a vendor name. You pick whatever one you use, and you take that and say, show me every risky sign in or chain of events that could relate to this. Show me, so Sacred Spider is a threat actor that was kind of originally used to go compromise different major organizations, and they have some indicators of compromise or IOCs. You could potentially say, show me every instance of Sacred Spider potentially targeting my environment, right? And let the tool go filter through the logs and pull back and say, yep, I saw that they tried, compromising your environment 3 times in the last 4 months or something. That would be really, really interesting. We do see a lot of automation continuing to be built out as well. This isn't really what's in the next 5 years, but it could be easier and easier to integrate some of these and build the workflows associated with them. I would love if you could just say, again, with the AI, build a workflow to do this and account for these various items and let it go automatically build the workflow for you. And then you put in all the different connectors that you need potentially and just validate it that it works with the business flow. Because every organization's process is going to be slightly different. But if you could just build the framework for you, right now, what we're typically seeing is organizations are building these out. And if there's a community group, they'll share out their packs or, their templates. And then others can adopt it and then kind of do the same. But it'd be nice if the tool could just do it for you.
That did remind me, Nate, when I went to Octane, because you know how they kind of release what they might be coming out with in the future. They did mention that they were coming out with how you can kind of, like you said, ask it, like, hey, is this happening in my environment? I can't remember if they used Sentinel-1 or ThreatLocker as an example, or maybe even it was Palo Alto, but they integrated it into Okta, and then somehow you can ask it, like, hey, show me this. Was this device compromised? That kind of thing. And it would pull the data from, if it was, like, I think it was Palo Alto, and then it would get in Okta, it would show you what you asked it from Palo Alto. So
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of the trend that we've been seeing with a lot of organizations is so I'll talk about, there's the EDR, endpoint detection and response, then you throw a management layer on top, MDR, then once it started integrating with other services, everyone started calling it XDR, and now there's probably next gen XDR or, whoever people need to throw the marketing language on. But we see that with identity as well. So to Mariah's point is now your identity solution can integrate with your firewall solution. It can integrate with the endpoint to basically get all that device level context to build a bigger picture to figure out, is this legitimate access? And it can take all the indicators, put them together, build a trust score, and then grant access. So we do see a little bit of that today, but we could see those integrations go much, much deeper in the future.
Interesting. AI is so interesting, and these automations are so cool to kind of hear about. And I think it'll be interesting to maybe in 5 years do basically the same podcast and say, well, how has it changed? Yeah. Is there anything we did not cover that you want to point out about identity access management or anything kind of connected to it?
It's super exciting. I love it. I can't wait for the deepest dive where we get to get real technical as well. So if you're an IT person, that's going to be the podcast that you want to really dive into.
For sure. I mean, if you're not an IT person, you're obviously welcome, or forward it on to your IT person. Like, we would love to have kind of everyone there. So we just talked about HR being at the table when implementing this identity access management. It's probably important for everyone to understand at least the basics of it.
Well, and that's a good point, because when we were implementing a lot of this, there were items where HR was doing the process, and I was like, why are you doing that? I can automate that, right? Yeah. I can save you 4 hours a week or something. There's no need for you to do that. Like, even basic things like organization charts, right? Is oftentimes people are going into Visio and trying to drag boxes around all day. There's solutions out there that tie into this identity to where when you say make an update, if someone has a new manager, different job title, whatever it is, within 5 minutes it can update, and it's always accurate. So removing HR processes, other things such as, hey, when there's a new employee, I need to go email IT, letting them know that employee is starting. Here's their, maybe it's a remote employee. Here's their home address. Here's all that type of stuff. It's in HR, but the IT team needs to still work with the user. Maybe you want to send a welcome email off to that new employee like 2 days before they start, saying, thank you for joining the team. I'm looking forward to having you here, on Monday. Just wanted to send a thank you message. And if you need anything, contact these individuals. Here's your manager name. That can all be automated, right? So really exciting stuff that you can do.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Yep, I know I'm going to have to. I need a little red light, green light here on the podcast. But thank you so much, Nate and Mariah, for joining us today. And if you're interested and want to know more about identity access management or would like to get in touch with anyone on this podcast, please reach out to us at info@cit-net.com or head out to our website, cit-net.com/podcast, and we'll be back next week with an all new episode.